Manisha ji will be formally introduced by Dr. Uma Shankar Pandey. But before that, I must say that Manisha ji has been one of the pivots, if I can say, of this, because especially in terms of, looking at the curriculum and the learning module, etc. And we all know the kind of expertise that she comes with, and we will be listening to that in a short while. My personal interaction with her has been very, very enriching. And I remember exactly that. Recall one incident when she'd asked me a very specific question regarding the curriculum. And when we try to do a domain understanding of communication, how best we can understand to look at specifics and address that only. And that is where Manisha ji actually pointed out. And we were trying to look at development communication, but also bring in our piece on development journalism. And besides all of this, Manisha ji has a huge experience, a repertoire of experience. But today, she is going to be addressing one of my very favorite topics, because this is what we say, that evidence-based reporting or journalism has to look at storytelling as well. And that has to be the USP. So I will hand it over to our coordinator, director, mentor, also a very important force for this development journalism initiative, Dr. Uma Shankar Pandey, who is the project director of this project that we are collaborating with. Unicef and Press Club Kolkata is collaborating together. Thank you, and over to Dr. Uma Shankar Pandey.
Thank you, Shushita Bardhan, for your kind words, and this wouldn't have been possible with all your active cooperation. And just to give you a peek of how hard we've been working, 5 minutes back, I just landed back from a physical meeting at the Press Club Kolkata. So for us, it's all of us are extremely passionate about this project and the kind of work that we're doing. And a lot of brainstorming has gone behind that, and we decided on one of the topics as storytelling. And who better than Professor Manisha Pathak-Shelat to talk about this? Mr. Snesi Shur, the Press Club President, will also join us shortly. And on behalf of everyone at Press Club Kolkata, and on behalf of all the others in the organizing team, I welcome you all to the second day of this faculty development program on development journalism. I have the proud privilege of presenting to you our first speaker of the day, Professor Manisha Pathak-Shelat, who's a professor in communication in digital platforms and strategies at MICA, Ahmedabad, China. Sorry, India. I'm so sorry. How come?
You are going global.
And she chairs MICA's Center for Development Management and Communication. She has taught and worked as a media consultant and researcher in India, Thailand, and the United States. She has a PhD in mass communication with a minor in gender and women's studies from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, USA, and in education from the Maharaja Sayajirao University of Baroda, India. Her research interests are media and information literacy, young people's media cultures, communication for social change, new media, gender, and trans cultural citizenship. She's shared her research globally as a guest speaker and through her books, journal papers in International Journal of Communication, New Media and Society, Journal of Youth Studies, Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy, Communication Inquiry, Journal of Children and Media, Communicar, Media Asia, Journal of Consumer Behavior, and book chapters. Awards and fellowships include the Soviet Land Nehru Award, Shastri Indo-Canadian Faculty Research Award, the Salzburg Seminar Fellowship, Tata Fellowship for the Study of Contemporary India, MICA AGK Award for Meritorious Service, and the Lifetime Achievement Award for Contribution to Media and Communication Education by the Global Media Education Council. She serves as the editor of the Journal of Creative Communications that MICA publishes with SAGE. She represents MICA at UNESCO's Media and Information Literacy and Intercultural Dialogue University Network, and is an active member of National Leadership Forum for Vaccine Confidence. She's led several capacity building programs for non-profits, various state governments, corporate sector, and international organizations. I'm happy to present to you Professor Manisha Pathak-Shelat for her presentation on storytelling. Over to you, ma'am. You're on mute, ma'am.
unmute. Yeah. So thank you very much, USP and Sucharita. It's always a pleasure to work with you and collaborate with you on anything. So I'm very happy to be here. And Sucharita, you're very right. We had this long discussion, development communication and development journalism. And I'm happy that telling stories of social change really straddles both these fields, because you tell stories of social change as development communication professional, you also tell stories of social change as development journalist. So I think this topic is relevant to both these areas. Charita had sent some videos to the office to download, so I just hope somebody has downloaded them and are ready to play.
I'll just find out and get back. Debayon, will you be able to support us in this? Debayon?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have them?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so just give us a cue when you want it to be played right now.
Yeah, so, as I said, the stories of social change is something that we do as journalists and as development communication professionals. But even when we are listening or reading stories by other people, stories have this power to move us, right? So all of us have at one point or the other encountered stories that have moved us, inspired us, and changed, our thinking, our beliefs, and like spurred us to do something. So I'll start with one such story. If you can play the video.
Can you make it full screen?
मम्मी नाराज तो होने ही वाली, वो तो चाहती है कि मैं डॉक्टर ही बनूं। इसने हॉलीडेज खत्म और बोर्डिंग स्कूल शुरू, एक दिन भी एक्स्ट्रा रुकने नहीं दिया। मम्मी भी ना। मम्मी ने अपनी लाइफ अपने आप ही बनाई। 18 साल की थी जब उनके फादर ने उन्हें घर से निकाल दिया। अकेले रहने का तो सोचने से भी डर लगता है। मैंने अपने पापा को कभी देखा नहीं, और मेरी असली माँ, वो बहुत बीमार रहती थी। उनके बारे में सिर्फ एक ही दिन याद है जो मैं कभी भुला नहीं पाती। एक दिन कुछ लोग आए और उन्हें एम्बुलेंस में ले गए। फिर वो कभी वापस ही नहीं आई। फिर एक दिन मम्मी आई। बहुत प्यार से मुझे अपनी गोद में बिठाया और मुझे अपने घर ले गई। तबीयत खराब थी तो पूरी रात मेरे साथ बैठी रही। सुबह मम्मी ने एक सुंदर सी रेड फ्रॉक पहनाई, मेरे लिए ढेर सारे चिप्स बनाए। मम्मी के साथ 10 साल हो गए। अब तो मम्मी कम और दोस्त ज्यादा बन गई। संडे हम दोनों का फेवरेट दिन है। बालों में तेल लगाने के बाद दोपहर में मेरा फेवरेट लंच, कड़ी चावल, और रात में हॉरर फिल्म। डर लगता है, पर मम्मी होती है ना तो नहीं लगता। ये है मेरी मम्मी, है ना प्यारी? मम्मी ने लाइफ में इतने प्रॉब्लम्स देखे, कितना कुछ सहा है, पर फिर भी उन्होंने हमेशा मेरा ख्याल रखा है। सिविक्स बुक में तो लिखा है कि सबके लिए बेसिक राइट सेम होते हैं, फिर मम्मी को क्यों नहीं? इसलिए मैं डॉक्टर नहीं, लॉयर बनूंगी मेरी मम्मी के लिए।
Thank you. So if you can stop sharing, I'll go back to my presentation.
I have stopped already.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll briefly just walk you through what I plan to do in today's session. And I would like to tell this right now that, some of you might be in the session that I had in the Global Media Education Conclave. And so a little bit of it might be, slightly repetitive for you, but then there are again, more deeper points that I would like you to pay attention to. So we're going to briefly touch upon why tell stories, what do stories do, different types of development stories, key ingredients of a good story, because I always believe that why do people think that development stories are boring, right? They can be really powerful and interesting. So we'll talk about some key ingredients that make stories gripping. And then I have some critical questions for you to consider. So, okay, why do we tell stories? And I was recently reading an interview of a Bhutanese film director, and they said a very important thing is that, in Bhutan, when somebody says, tell me a story in their language, it translates as untie a knot for me. I really found it beautiful because that's what stories do. We have so many knots in our mind, they untie and open our vision. So one of the important thing is, what is this? Please make slide share.
Ma'am, it is not visible as a slide. Can you make it bigger? Only the slide, as a slideshow.
So yeah, on my laptop, unfortunately, it appears as slideshow. But let me try once again. It's loading, and I think it will be better.
It's visible, ma'am. It's visible.
Okay, great. Okay, so I usually like my session to be more interactive, but I think we have limited time. So I'm not making these questions for you, but I'm just going to talk more today. And one of the very important thing that social change stories need to do is that they have to bear witness. See, as a journalist also, you have a powerful role for witness, right? Because sometimes people who are going through something cannot be vocal about it. They cannot tell their own stories, but you witness what is happening and you tell other people's stories. Okay? So bearing witness is an important role of stories. The other important thing is acknowledgement and recognition. So, scholars have claimed that unless you acknowledge people, their presence, their existence, you recognize their issues, it's almost like, a social death, right? So what happens sometimes, and especially with marginalized groups, is that for people who are powerful, who are in the mainstream, who are like so-called normal people, the marginalized people's agendas are not in these people's radar, right? And it's not completely their fault also, because everybody is busy living their lives, right? If it is not in part of your social situation, it's rarely that you'll experience something. And that's why stories are very powerful tool for people to acknowledge and recognize what other people are going through, what is their situation, right? So you recognize people's issues, you bring different situations to light, and not only that, stories also act as acknowledgement and recognition of good work, good efforts, whether it's individual, institutional, whatever, local, global. But as journalists and as development storytellers, it's your important job to recognize what good work is happening. Because sometimes, for people who are into social change communication, or people who are into, say, working with grassroots people, they're not doing it for money. But if you recognize, all the efforts that goes into it, it's a big boost for so many people to continue their work. So that is one important role. The third role that stories have to play is they have to question, critique, and challenge. Because ordinary people cannot do this, but journalists have this power, to question, critique, and challenge. Because, we have to also remember this, that stories can also reinforce status quo. I mean, there are so many mythological stories and so many even other stories, so many stories in the Bollywood, right? They completely reinforce what is going on, the status quo. They don't want to critique or challenge. So as development storytellers, I think that is an important role that your stories can play. And the last one is my favorite, and that is stories can envision alternatives. See, like the story that we just saw, it very subtly does all of these things. Did you notice that? It bears witness to this mother and daughter's life, what the daughter went through and how her life changed after she met this new mother. It recognizes, transgender people's issues. It questions that why they do not have, equal rights. And then they envision alternatives. So, the stories can tell you that, look, things don't have to end this way. Things don't have to be this way. There are other ways of living. There are better ways of resolving conflicts. So if your stories can do that, then I think they are playing an important role. So M.K. Asante, who is a professor, activist, rapper, author, he always says in his talks that stories have to transform and not just inform. And I think that's an important thing we have to keep in mind as social change storytellers. Okay, so can you see the slides moving? Yeah. Okay, good. So what you have to do right in the beginning is that, depending on your context, depending on your purpose, you need to decide that, okay, what kind of story you are going to tell. Right? Because as like trained journalists, you know how important angle is, how important framing is to any story. So, and you can tell stories in first person, you can tell stories about other people. So there are leadership stories, which are a plenty. Impact stories are very popular in development field, because people want to know that if so much effort is going on, if so much investment is happening, what is the impact? Right? So you can tell impact stories. You can even make policy stories interesting if you treat them as human interest stories. You can tell inspiration stories. So suppose there is a village and, people themselves have come together and done some wonderful work. You can tell stories that inspire other people to work like them. There are announcement stories of like new schemes, new policies. And there also, if you do it creatively and, because whenever there is any announcement story that you are writing, people have this one question that, okay, what is in it for me? So if you take care of that, people would get interested in different announcements. There are slice of life stories, which, like when you saw the first one, it is again a combination of, several of these things. So it's not that, every story has to be only one kind. You can also combine, a few of this and write your stories. There are sensitization stories, whereas again, more like acknowledgement and recognition again, because, you can sensitize people about things they've never thought about. Like somebody had just given an example of Pink, and Pink really did a lot of sensitization. They also, research stories, and there are also call to action stories. Right? So as development journalists, you have a wide variety of choices to make. But coming from MICA, where like branding and advertising is a huge part of the work we do, I often ask this question. Can you see the new slide? Why should development stories be boring? Or are
Yes,
ma'am, it's
ma'am.
visible.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Yeah, so again, I come to my question that why should development stories be boring? If people can make branding stories interesting, and what are brands? Like mostly they are about what? A product, a thing, a service, right? That is when you tell development stories, you have real heroes and heroines, right? You have very gripping situation, because in a very classical, structure of a story, we normally have a protagonist, we have a conflict, we have a resolution, and then we have a climax. And this is always a part of most development stories. So if we observe, like brand stories or advertising stories, we can learn a lot about how to interestingly even tell development stories. So for example, one thing you observe about brand stories, and because, they have very little time and it's expensive, they have learned how to keep the pace. So a story to be gripping has to keep the audience looking for more, thinking, okay, what next, right? So that maintaining that pace is very important. They have learned how to create, characters that stick with you. So for example, here the picture shows Make My Trip, series of advertising for with Alia Bhatt and Ranveer Singh. And if you remember, we were actually looking forward to, okay, when is the new one coming? Because they had like very interesting characters, they acted well, that there is always also brevity in branding and advertising stories. And again, because they have to do their job in very little time and in very little space, they have learned to make use of every little gesture, every word, what in the cinematic language we call mise-en-scène, how do you place different objects and things in the background so that they also help you tell the stories. How do you dress up the characters? How do you give them mannerisms? They use all of these things to make sure that it's all contributing towards storytelling and the length is curtailed. And this is something all of us have to these days deal with, the attention deficit. because people are getting used to shorter and shorter, crisper and crisper content. So anything that is long winding, it's bound to lose their attention. It is sad. I mean, I don't support it, but unfortunately, that's the reality. That means that none of us have, um, scope for rambling. So we have to be brief. The stories are also very audience centric. They have studied their audience very, very well. What are their aspirations? What are their attitude? What are their pain points? What do they like to hear and listen? What they are looking for, from a certain service or a product. So it's completely evidence based, research based, and most of these stories are not information or message heavy. They're not cluttered. They focus on one important message. So I think these are some of the very important lessons that we can learn from branding and advertising stories. And I know, and this is what some of my students also ask me that, oh, ma'am, because they have all these big budgets, they have stars like Alia and Ranveer, so naturally their stories would be interesting. But I don't think that that's the only reason. Uh, right now, to try and play this next film from my own screen. Let us see if that works. It will save us a lot of time. Let me see if I can play it from here. Just have to start my, but I have it. Can we start the volume?
I can do that if you want. You want me to do that?
Okay, you can do that. Then I'll stop sharing.
पता है कल ऑफिस जाते हुए क्या हुआ? किसी ने मुझ पे पॉपकॉर्न फेंका। देखा तो 2-3 लड़के बाइक पे बैठे थे।
फिर
मेरा पीछा करने लगे और छेड़ने लगे ये कह के कि अरे मैडम, आपके बॉल में मेरा पॉपकॉर्न अटक गया है, जरा वापस कर दो ना। क्या करे, कितनों को समझाए?
Share your story with your son. Don't let what happened to you happen to another woman. To share your story, click on this link.
Yes, this was an example of a story very simply told with, people who are not actors, right? Not very expensive production, but again, very briefly, it hits really hard. And it serves two functions. It tells us why sharing our stories are important, and it also tells a story of a mother and a child, right? So it's not that you always need like big stars and very high production value to tell a good story. This is
Ma'am, you are muted, ma'am.
Yeah, we are back. Okay, so as I said that it's more about the key ingredients of story and not only having stars and high production values and spending money. And for any good stories, if we turn to like really ancient, scholars, Aristotle gave us the very basic principle of rhetoric, right? Ethos, pathos, and logos. And if you use this three things, if there is ethos in your story, if there is pathos in your story, and if there is logos, and you use this based on the context in which you are telling the story, keeping in mind your audience, keeping in mind your purpose. Why are you telling the story? Considering your medium. Is it a visual medium? Is it oral like storytelling? Are you doing something for social media? Are you conveying it through puppetry? Whatever your medium, right? You have to use ethos, pathos, and logos suiting that medium. And also storyteller, that is you or your team. Because when you plan to tell a story, you have to be very conscious of what kind of skills you have, right? Or your team has, what kind of resources you and your team has. And based on that, you plan, how you will use ethos, pathos, and logos. So I'm very quickly going to just go through these three important ingredients. Ethos is the most important ingredient, especially for journalists and development storytellers, because ethos is your credibility and character. Ethos will decide whether people will trust your stories. So many times, like even not just you, but your organization, the newspaper you are working for, or the television channel you are working for. Like so many times we hear that, oh, it was on that channel, forget it. It would be leaning towards that. Oh, this newspaper, don't trust anything they say, right? So if your newspaper or your organization does not have that credibility, it will reflect on you. And similarly, your own character and credibility will reflect on your organization. So ethos is very important for a social change storyteller. It also includes choosing language, that is appropriate to the audience and topic, the appropriate vocabulary, knowing the context and the media. But for a journalist or a development storyteller, showing that you are qualified to tell this story, and also showing that you were present, it's something that you've really witnessed. It adds to your story. So here in the picture, we see a journalist, who's really taking pains to go to the field and cover an important event. And I know that in all your stories, you can't be putting your pictures always that I was there, look at this picture. But how you narrate, your narration will have to reflect that, it's a story that you've really experienced and it's not just downloaded from somewhere from the internet. So that is an important part of the ethos. Also, making yourself sound fair and unbiased is a very important part of ethos. When people actually encounter your story, they should feel that you are representing the voices of people and it is not written only for your self-interest. And usually, you build this credibility and character through your entire body of work. So it's not a single story, but it's your entire body of work that will reflect like how people see you as a storyteller. So ethos is very important, and these are the ways that you can make sure that you develop it. The next is pathos or emotional appeal. Do you recognize the person on this slide? Does anyone recognize the person on this slide? Anyone?
Achyut Samant.
Yes, yes.
Achyut Samant.
Yeah. So he is the founder of KIIT, and he is a man, who can really inspire millions. But look at these two photographs. If you just look at the first photograph, it's just like a close shot. But look at the second photograph. Do you think the second photograph emotionally draws you in? You want to know more? Like who this woman is, what is he doing with this woman? What is the story behind this, right? So, for development or social change stories to be interesting, for people to be wanting to watch or read it, you have to make sure that there is an emotional connect in your story. So there has to be a human touch, you have to show that you care when you write that story. You want to make people care about the characters, so strong characters, protagonists. You have to have empathy as a storyteller, right? If you yourself don't have empathy, you cannot actually create empathy for in your readers or audience. The words you use, the tone you use, all have to be emotionally connecting to people. Right? Always good to write development social change stories with a human interest angle and not just as a drab piece of, reporting statistics. Tension is a very important part of interesting story. So bring that tension, challenge, conflict, dilemma, right? Only when you actually bring that dilemma out, people realize that how difficult certain choices were, right? And then of course, photographs. So all these things add to the pathos in your stories and make people emotionally connect to your story. So as and in the Indian, theory of communication, like we have a very powerful theory. It's the rasa theory, right? We have the 9 rasas in Indian communication tradition, the Indian tradition of performance. And those 9 rasas are what actually establishes what we call like sadharanikaran, like they bring the audience and the storyteller on the common platform. And so when to use humor, when to use, tragedy, when do you inspire people by stories of bravery, all these rasas play an important part of making your stories important. And it's very easy to do that in development stories because deep down, all these things have happened, in people's lives. So one important thing we have to remember as storytellers is that we have to transform a statistical life into an identifiable life, right? So when you say that 1 out of 100 people, encounters this, it's still a statistical life. But when you say that Sushma, this happened to Sushma, Sushma becomes an identifiable life. And people are always more interested in identifiable life than in a statistical life. So there is an important lesson in storytelling. Okay, just one important point about using photographs is that photographs have to be used in a way that you don't invade dignity and privacy of the people whose stories you are telling. I think that's where a lot of journalists, don't have exert enough discretion. And that's one point I would really like to stress, that how you photograph people, how you present their photographs, make sure that you never affect their dignity because of those photographs, right? Because they have to live with the story you tell. You might move to the next story, but their own story is going to remain. So that is an important point. And finally, we come to the third important element of telling a good story, and that is the logos, or appeal to the logic. Because no development or social change stories will be convincible, if there is not, it's not based on facts, logical arguments. It does not appeal to people's rational mind. Only emotion will stay for some time, but then moving on, people will ask questions. So you can begin with emotions, but ultimately you'll have to present data. And I think one of the very important skills for journalists is that how to present data interestingly. How to present data briefly, interestingly, in a way that people understand. So when I was in the beginning of my journalistic career, somebody had given me a very important advice that as soon as there is anything beyond 4 zeros, always put it in the words, right? Because beyond 4 zeros, whether it's 6 or 7 zeros, people don't really differentiate. So always put that in words. Data visualization is a very important skill in journalism today. And I think organizations need to invest in that. So what sources are you using? How do you use your statistics, figures? All these things are very important for development stories. Cross-checking, making sure that your data are correct and not dubious. So consulting multiple sources. I mean, I don't think I have to tell you about these things as journalism professors. You already know that. And photographs also help by, acting as evidence. So they also not just add to the pathos, but also add to the logos. Okay, so I want to leave at least, 15 minutes or so for question and answer. So I'm just going to leave you, with the important question is that is being a mirror enough? Because, we say that journalists are mirror to the society. So when we when we tell social change stories, we say that, yes, this is a mirror to what is happening in the society. But just by showing the mirror, social change does not happen. So this is a dilemma that most journalists face in their career. That just to be the fly on the wall or do something, for the people about whose tragedy you are writing. Will you just, capture their pictures, tell their stories and leave and move on to the next story? And that's what your profession demands. Or you also act as a human being and do something about their plight. And I understand that as a journalist, you encounter so many of these stories. For how many groups and marginalized people can you contribute? So this is a real dilemma. I'm not considering this a trivial question that most of people, development journalists face. Okay? So people tell stories as cultural activism, as acknowledgement, as recognition, but unless, there is actual action in the field, only telling stories is like reaching somewhere, but not to the end. So as storytellers, we also have to be very sure that we highlight the actual action that is taking place, either by government or by non-profits or by individuals, anyone. But the actual acts of change have to be highlighted and not just issues and problems and situations. And ultimately, again, this is about whose stories you are telling and how you treat them. Because, as journalists, you have so much power. You have the space, you have the mandate, and so you can tell anybody's story that you want. But does it mean that you are not letting people tell their own stories in their own words? Are you putting words in their mouth? Are you interpreting their situation through your lens and not actually, trying hard to figure out that, okay, what is it, what are they actually facing? What is their interpretation of the situation, right? So we can very easily, because of our education, because of our power, it's very easy for us to fall in the trap of speaking for people without consulting them And that is one thing that we all have to be really careful about. I'll stop here. I do have another video. It was just a combination of how in a single film ethos, pathos, and logos have been used, but we don't have to watch it because I think it's disrupting, a lot of the flow. So let's have some discussion now, and then if we have time, then we can just end with that video. But I think this is all that was from me, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Professor Manisha Pathak-Shelat. And as always, it's very fascinating to listen to your deliberations. And I'm sure there are quite a few questions. So please just raise your hands, introduce yourself, and let's start the discussions. And yes, Ranu Tomar and Shambhu Ghatak and Sham Tarkhel. So in that order, please.
Yes, very good evening, ma'am. I am Ranu Tomar. Thank you for this presentation. I have a curiosity. When you were presenting the aspects, I wanted to know from you what kind of stories are
For some
there
reason, your voice
which
is
are
clear.
written under pressure. So
Can you write your question
could
in the
you
chat
please
box,
elaborate
please?
on those pressures? On
Just the last part, Ranu, if
As
you
a
can just, what is the
storyteller?
As a storyteller?
Your voice is not clear. Please write down the last part of the question.
A storyteller can take to align the message. So, okay, am I audible now, sir?
No,
Better.
it's going like a sinusoidal curve. It's going up and then it's going down and again going up and down. So you can write on the chat box. Meanwhile, we can ask Shambhuji to ask his question. And Ranu, please write down your question on the chat box and we'll read it out. Or ma'am can read it herself and she'll respond to that.
Hello, am I audible? I mean, it's nice to hear you, and it was an incredible presentation. I am from Inclusive Media for Change. We are a very small initiative which started in 2009. And my question to you is, said one thing about the figures, like when it crosses 4 digits, you prefer to use words instead of digits. But if you remember, when the 2G scam took place, allegedly, one of the newspapers, they put the headlines and they put all the zeros in 1.76 lakh crore. They put the entire number as a headline. So just wanted to know how wise was that, putting all the digits as the headline. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that had a purpose. They had a clear purpose because just the sheer number of zeros would catch your attention, right? That, oh my God, like so many zeros. And that really served that purpose. So I think that was a smart move in that situation. But if you really want me, for example, to understand that, okay, how much money was spent, say, on this road or on this dam, I think in such situation where actually, it is part of the body, it's always better to spell it out in words. But in this particular instance, I think this was a very smart move, actually.
Thank you.
Good evening, ma'am. My question is, by taking the example of the first the touch for care you have shown by the Whigs. They have done a huge campaign on touch for care in all the countries. So when you were telling about the presentation, that we have to understand the human interest and the empathy. So my question is that by understanding the human interest and the empathy, if we try to do a storytelling also, don't you think the media buying comes place over here? Because we don't see this type of films in the television, because it's a 3 minutes. When we are presenting any ads, we do it for 30 seconds, 60 seconds, we do it. But if we see, we have seen this ad in the television, but they have shown it in a 30 seconds. The impact which is happening in 30 seconds, the more impact is happening in 3 minutes. So don't you think the media buying plays a very important role, not only the human interest?
No, absolutely. And see, as storytellers, we are compelled to tell the best story in the circumstances we are in, right?
Right.
Yeah, if we are given 30 seconds, we have to learn to tell a story in 30 seconds.
Right.
And that is where we do our best. That, okay, how I use every word, every image, everything in such a way that I can still tell a story in 30 seconds.
Yes,
and the breakthrough story really does it, like in a very short time, right?
Yeah, but the impact of this 3-minute touch for care campaign has a more impact than the 30-second ads they have run in the television. So the human interest part is getting affected for buying also.
Yes.
For the media buying.
But see, it's so expensive, right, to run ads on television, and even the 3-minute format is not even allowed. It's not even there. So you just have to work within those limitations. And that's why they have taken, the story very widely on social media.
Right.
It's also very interesting that how you can use multiple media to tell the same story, and you craft your story to suit the medium, both the strengths of the medium and the limitations of the medium.
Right.
So that's also an interesting thing. And I think now most newspapers also have online space, and that gives you much more space to explore like longer formats.
Right.
And I think you should use that.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Do you want to go? You want to try once again?
Ranu?
Ranu Tomar?
Yeah. Am I audible now, ma'am?
Yes, you are.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry for the breaking voice. Ma'am, I would just like to know how a storytelling is distorted when it is written or like created under pressure. Second thing, what kind of liberty a storyteller can take to align the message for the audience, reader, or viewer? I would like to know from you. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, but so important questions. What was the first one, Ranu? Exactly what you said. How is it plotted?
Yeah, how it gets distorted when it is created under pressure. So
Yes.
what could be the pressure points from your perspective?
I think, when you tell the story in a hurry, right? Most of us, I think the first mistake, and that's what I told in the last slide, is that the first mistake all of us do when we are in a hurry is that we see everything from our own lens, right? And all of us have our own baggage. All of us. That comes from our own life experiences, your own identities like of class, caste, gender, geographic identities, right? So the first mistake we do in a hurry is to see everything through our lens. It will not completely go away because we use our lens. Whose else we would use, right? But in a hurry, this can distort the story. The other thing that can distort a story is that, when you go to cover a situation and you are writing a story, you only get the voices of the powerful. See, usually when we go to a village, for example, to cover a story, you will be welcomed by the sarpanch, you'll have lunch at maybe one of the leaders' place, and you will hear a lot from them. But there will be a lot of people who even otherwise don't get to speak, right? And you will never know their version unless you very consciously try to get their version. So these are some of the things, which can distort the story. And then, of course, the worst thing is that if your organization has a certain political ideology, they might not let you tell the story in a particular way. So that could also distort the story.
Yeah, okay, thank you, ma'am.
Your question, and what is the second part?
Aligning the message with such distortion.
I don't know really what to say, because basically try not to distort, right?
Correct, yeah.
Your message has to be very clear, and you also, it's not that you always take sides in your story. Sometimes the picture is gray, and as a journalist you have to present both the sides. But there is this meme that is making rounds of the Facebook for some time, is that, well, you can't say that it could be dry or it could be raining. Just go look out of window. Is it dry or it's raining, right? So you can't sit on fence like that. But sometimes the situation demands that you present both the sides. That look, if you look at the story from this angle, it's like this. The classic Rashomon thing, right? That there could be 4 different angles to the same story. And as a skillful storyteller, you can present all 4 angles.
Fine. Yes, thank you, ma'am.
Do we have any more questions? So on behalf of the participants, Manisha ma'am, we had a similar discussion yesterday as well. So in our classes, in both UG and PG classes, and even in in some of the diploma classes, how do we go about teaching storytelling, or how to make storytelling classes more interesting, and to make people, make our students take up all these things easier. So basically, what are the pedagogical practices you would suggest for storytelling?
Okay. So I think one very important thing I would suggest is that get your hands dirty, I would say, because no amount of theoretical learning about storytelling will make you a storyteller unless you try telling stories. You learn with experience. You tell a story, that's how stand-up comedians, I've heard, practice their art. I mean, they actually write their joke and practice that joke on audiences, and they see, like, because a great joke written on paper can fall flat when it is told live. So I think getting your hands dirty, telling different type of stories, telling the same story, from many different angles, in many different styles, I think that could be one really interesting way to, get a grip on how to tell stories, share your stories, get feedback, because it's only with practice and experience you really can start understanding that, okay, what clicks with your readers or your audience. And so your classmates can also serve, as audience and readers. And I think that could be one helpful pedagogy to start.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Ms. Shushmita Bardhan, would you want to come in at this point of time?
No, I have nothing else to add. I've been listening to her with rapt attention, and I was looking at some of the very important slides, and I like the play of words that she uses, and that's so important, even as a storyteller doing the presentation. At some other point of time, maybe Manisha ji, we will come back to you like we did with the curriculum, maybe in terms of looking more into the lesson planning, because that is something that we would be wanting to support when this finally gets rolled out in the universities, colleges. So what and how else can we support the faculties? If we can make some kind of a plan, I think USP and even Sneha Shur, we've been discussing on this quite a lot. And yesterday also it came up for discussion with Mrinal Chatterjee sir, etc. So let us keep in touch with you. And you are one of our development journalism advocates, champions, forerunners. So we will keep in touch, and we hope to be able to roll it out in West Bengal across universities. And I hope many of the professors and faculties who are here in West Bengal, as well as from outside, will also feel energized and motivated, to try it out in their respective academic institutions. Thank you so much, Manisha ji. It's always such a pleasure to listen to you, to be with you, to interact. And we look forward to our next association as well. Thank you.
Wish you all the best for the rest of the program.
Thank you so
much. I'll play the 2-minute video, and we'll request Manisha ma'am to stay along for another maybe 5 minutes or so.
Yeah.
If anyone has any questions in the meanwhile, and in the meantime, our colleague Dr. Devan Bhaduri will also share the YouTube links of yesterday's session. So we had 3 sessions yesterday. The inaugural session, and there was one on development, perspectives on development by Professor Amit Shubhanri, and there was another on different facets of development journalism by Professor Mrinal Chatterjee. So that's up on our official YouTube channel, and we'll share it on the YouTube, the YouTube link on the chat box. We'll also send them over to you by email. So now I'll play the video.
सबका भला हो ये हर कोई चाहता है, और थोड़ी सी अच्छाई के लिए रुके कई इंसान हैं। किसी के लिए अपने पास्ट में जीना बन गई है मजबूरी। अपनी मंजिल कैसे ढूंढेंगे ये जब इनकी आंखों की रोशनी है बुझती। कोई है जो दिन रात किस्मत खुलने के इंतजार में रहता है। चांद नहीं चाहिए इसे जनाब, पानी का एक गिलास ही काफी है। नमक जैसे स्वाद अनुसार, वैसे इनके सपने हैं इनकम अनुसार। कुछ बनने के लिए कुछ करना होगा, या सिर्फ पैसों का होना जरूरी होगा। जितना बढ़ना है उतना पढ़ लो, ये सीख तो हमने सबको सिखाई। पर बेटी का महीना जैसे शुरू हुआ, बंद हो गई उसकी पढ़ाई। अच्छा होगा नहीं अगर अनवर अपनी मंजिल देख पाए। और निमेरा का हर बच्चा दिल भरने तक पानी पी जाए। अच्छा तो तब भी होगा हेतल ख्वाब देखने से ना डरे। और महीने के वो 4 दिन किसी बच्ची की लाइफ ना बदले। कुछ अच्छा होने के लिए अच्छा करना भी तो जरूरी है। कईयों की लाइफ में चेंज लाने के लिए हियर फॉर गुड का कमिटमेंट भी तो जरूरी है।
So this was just as an example of how, like, in a short time, they brought in Ethos through the bank and Anushka Sharma. There is a lot of pathos, and they've also, given us the right amount of numbers to make us believe that, yes, there is actually work happening. So this is just an example of how 3 things have been brought together in this piece of communication.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And it reminds me, of one thing that I love talking about, when we talk about storytelling, is how our television channels use it so beautifully, whether it is the Indian Idol, or whether it is any singing competition, or whether it is a Kaun Banega Crorepati or whatever, it's always the story behind the people, not just their performance, but how they have encountered all those things about those. It so beautifully captures the essence of why these things stay with us. And I'm sure that in development journalism and in every kind of journalism that we'll be doing, this will become a very, very important part of not only the way we teach, but also the way we practice journalism in days to come. So any further questions from anyone? Then I'll leave it to Professor Manisha for her final comments, and then we'll go on to the next session. So anyone else has any question, observation? No one? So once again, to you, ma'am, for your final thoughts before we go on to the next.
Just one final, I think, reinforcement that learning to make statistical lives, identifiable lives is the first, I think, step in storytelling. As you just said, USP, like the contestants in all these mainstream television programs, right? They become identifiable lives for us. And I think that's where storytelling begins.
Thanks again, ma'am, for this wonderful perspective. And as we've already said, this session on storytelling will also be on YouTube. And at tomorrow's session, we'll be sharing the link of this particular session. So this will be there. And Manisha ma'am is available on social media and on so many other platforms. And she's always been very kind with her support for the various activities that we've done here, and also before this series, the webinar series we had last year, and in Rajasthan, and in a lot of other activities we've done, including curriculum planning and so on and so forth. So I'm sure we'll continue having our support, continue having your support in days to come. And I'm sure we are looking for some very interesting times, because we intend to carry this storytelling part even for students' workshop, and also for practicing journalists, where we'll probably put more stress on how to use the same information to create different kinds of stories for different audiences, and things like that. So all these inputs will be very important, and we'll continue having these conversations. So this is just as we always keep on saying, and Mr. Charita Bardhan also says these are the starting points, so that we can keep.
Teaser. It's just a teaser.
Yes.
Yes, it's just a teaser. Yeah. There's a long path ahead. Yes.
So I would love to have a little bit more voice from the audience. So we've had 3 or 4 questions. So it would be really nice if we can have a little bit of more perspective from the audience itself. Because one of our resource persons yesterday, said he would have loved to have more discussion. So we don't want to leave this point, just like that. So is there anyone with any other perspective, any other comment?
Yeah, Dr. USP, Akanksha this side.
Please, ma'am, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is just a general observation. When we had only BBC, we had a clear way in which the documentary was made. And now when we have social ads, we have very bombastic ways in which private companies are coming forth, and very strongly, very serious things have been put across in just 2 or 3 minutes. But how can the development sector, without the CSR kind of or private kind of money, actually have such strong storytelling techniques? That is a very, I should say, a light question, because people who have money would want to go work for a private firm and not for the government or the downtrodden. So how do we attract that kind of talent from the students? This is my question to you as a teacher, and to ma'am and everybody there.
It's a tough one. Yeah, because only if people have passion, I think they will stay in this, area of development and social change, because it's obviously, everyone knows that there is so much more money elsewhere. Right? But it's not difficult to train people in storytelling. So once you have those people, I think even with simple resources, because now there are very nice digital tools available, even if you don't have big budgets, but if you are creative and if you keep the simple principles of, generating human connection, like interestingly presenting the facts, there are now digital tools available, which even the existing team of 4 or 5 people can do wonderful storytelling through that. So probably that could be one way, but probably USP, you have a better answer to this.
Yeah, see,
can I come in? Yeah.
Yeah.
Please,
Please. Dr. USP, please. Then later on I can.
Please go ahead, ma'am. Please.
Okay, so I am from Jharkhand. I am here in Jamshedpur, and since past 25 years, we are working with, because I'm in Muslim minority college, so we are working with minority students, and we are working with tribals as well. So I have seen that they have so much enthusiasm because they can see that their story is being told by somebody else, and they are not perfectly being represented. So the change which I can see in past 10 years, that now they are coming up with their own stories. And then when we see that from the stories from their perspective, then we can see that how they are targeting and showing those little things, which we have never put our focus on. So that is why I think it's a very empowering tool, that if we just change the perspective and give them, or empower them with the digital tools and allow them to move with camera, we can get a number of stories which are very, very much rooted, which are very local, which are very real stories.
Yeah, and ultimately,
can I join this discussion?
Yes.
Yeah,
Hi, Manisha. Thank you so much for this very important session. I would like to agree with Neha here, because my experience with young girls in Rajasthan, when we are talking to them about sexual and reproductive health, has been very similar to Neha's. When we, in a group of 3, when they're making their own videos, this idea of, giving them mobile phone and then, making them digitally literate enough so that they can tell their own stories. This has really worked in them coming out about their problems with regards to menstruation, the cultural and social issues related to it, the family structure and sex education. So yes, this whole idea of imparting media literacy, digital skills, and and if they have a product in hand, it's my video, that I have made it video, I have done the camera, that I am the protagonist in the video. This is so exciting for them. This whole concept of my story, I have made it, the sense of ownership. So, and this has really worked for us in terms of, trying to have conversations with them, respecting their knowledge and trying to understand their concerns. And of course, telling them what all is available in terms of health communication or mobile health for that matter. So, absolutely, Neha, similar experiences.
No, I completely agree, Neha and Kulbin, with you. But I'll just add one point here, that it's also equally important that these stories are heard, right? So people will tell stories, but like, who is listening? Are we hearing those stories? So one thing we can do is that create those platforms, that their stories actually don't just stay in their cameras or, phones. Are heard widely. I think that is something we can really work.
Yeah. Diffusion of those stories is very, very important.
Although our speaker is here, but I can't restrain myself from pitching in a very important idea, that just cropped up, and I talk about that often. Is the concept of mirror neurons. Unless I identify with the protagonist or the idea itself, unless I as a receiver identify with the protagonist, I want him or her to win, I want the idea to win, I want him to surmount those obstacles. Unless that happens, that empathy is not there, or that feeling is not there. And probably, and that has certain fascinating kind of perspectives. For example, somebody told me that when I write with a chalk on a blackboard, the mirror neuron of the student actually sees it writing, so he sees it better, compared to if we put a PowerPoint screen or whatever. So unless, and we've heard this so very often, we identify with the character, or we identify with the situation, and there has a biological basis to it. And because of advancement in neuroscience and all, we know why it is happening. So once we know that, we've got people on that, it will be a wonderful way to begin. And on that note, I take this opportunity to thank everyone for your inputs.